So do you know someone in your life that's just a total sucker for marketing? In my life, that person happens to be my wife. Kelly is really a sucker for certain types of marketing, and I would say it has to do with food marketing. When she sees these commercials or these ads for special drinks at Starbucks or different food items, she just is totally bought into the marketing. It's like the marketing, those Starbucks signs with the new drink for the season just completely grab her and pull her in and force her to conform to what they want her to do, which is to get into the line and buy that drink. And I always just say it's just coffee in a different order, right? It's all the same thing. It's just marketed differently to get you to buy it. But she doesn't care. She says that's what she wants. Well, now my wife is not conformed into other things, but sometimes that's the way that we are in the world. We're so quickly conformed to the pattern of the world. We're so quickly conformed to what the world wants us to do, how we want to act, the way we want to think. And we as Christians, we know, this is something that we know so clearly, we don't have to state it, you've heard it a million times, that we're not to be conformed into the pattern of this world. But there are times where that's difficult, where that's challenging for us, and we might not even realize how conformed to the world are. What does that mean? It means that in our thinking, we are conformed, the way we think, the way we view different things, the way we believe about different things, our patterns of behavior, how we live our life. We don't want to be conformed to the pattern of the world. We want to be different. We're told that we're to be transformed by the renewing of our mind, that we're to live and look different, that we are to have a different pattern of our life, different behavior. We're to put off the old self and its former ways and the way we used to walk in the lusts and the passions of our flesh, and we're to walk in Christ. We're to be not conformed to the image and the pattern of the world, but we're to be conformed to the image and pattern of Christ. We're to look more like Christ, to be more Christ-like in our behavior. That's what we are called to do. And so all of us know that we need to not be conformed to the world, and the foundation to that is to remember that we are different from the world. And that was one of Pastor Mike's points from his sermon this weekend. It's not just that we pretend to be different, or we have the perspective that we're different, or the attitude that we're different. This isn't something that we just kind of accept, but it's not real. This is real. We are different from the world because we've been made different. We've been redeemed out of the world, and we are different. This is a new reality of the Christian life. And so we are different in our nature, in our character, in our status because of what Christ has done, and the patterns of our life and the thinking and the practices flow out of the new and changed reality. That's the perspective we need to have, and we need to remember that we are different. Now, inherently, just what this means is that things in your life are going to be different. You are different. So what does this mean to be different? Now, I thought about this with my wife when we got married. You know, before we were married, she had a different last name. Her name was different. She lived at home with her parents, and she had her own room, and she slept in her own bed. We lived life differently as single people than when we got married. That was just normal. She had a different residence, she had a different name, she even had a different title. She went from Miss to Mrs. When we got married, her maiden name changed to my name. She moved into my house. We slept in the same bed. There was so much that changed in our relationship. She now was Mrs. Atterbury instead of what her maiden name was. Everything was different. And that was such a normal change that normal people go through. But if you think about that, and you think, what would it be like if she went through that transition in our marriage, taking on my name, moving into my house, and yet started to then live like she wasn't married? She kept dating other guys, if she tried to sleep in another bed, if she acted like a single person, it wouldn't be real. It would mean that she really wasn't married, and if we were married in title, we wouldn't stay married for long if she lived like she was unmarried while we were married. Well, for us as Christians, what is said about us is that we are different as Christians. You have a new name. You have a new title. You're no longer slaves to sin, but you're slaves to God. You're no longer in bondage to sin. You're set free to live for Christ. You're no longer condemned under the wrath of God. You're saved from the wrath of God. You're no longer condemned. You're redeemed. You're set apart. You're not of the world. You're of Christ. You are your citizenship, your dwelling, your residence. You're not of the world. You are now a citizen of heaven, a child of God. All of these things are statements of the reality of the change that has taken place. And then it becomes incumbent on us right away to think, how then should we live? If that reality has taken place, we can no longer be conformed into the image and pattern of the world because we are different. We need to remember that we are different. This shouldn't be something that we use phrases with to say, like, I'm struggling to be like, not be like the world. You wouldn't say that when you're married. Hey, I'm struggling not to kiss other men if you just got married, ladies. You wouldn't say that. You wouldn't use that language because you're married. You're different. You're changed fundamentally. You would say, this is now what I have to do, what I must do. There's no option for me in this regard. I must now live, think, behave differently. In Christ, we have a new name, a new title, a new position, a new residence, and all of that changes how we live. Now, for Christians, this means that everything is different. If that reality is true and you are different, then everything is different. We need to live differently. That means every aspect of our life, how we go through trials, how we deal with suffering, it's different. We anticipate suffering and we go through it with joy instead of the world that goes through it with a sense of being crushed and being distraught. And we can look at it and know that there's a purpose and a plan behind it that God has. We think of dating differently, relationships differently, sex differently. We think of our context and our fellowship and our world. We love differently. We forgive differently. We care differently than the world, or at least we should, because we are different people, made new in Christ and different and distinct from the world. We even do something as simple as grieve. Everybody who faces death grieves, but we as Christians, we grieve with hope, knowing that if you are found in Christ, that there's life after this life, and so we can even grieve differently. Now, one of the things that I think we struggle with, and this is important to our context right now of what we're going through, is we need to have different expectations about what this looks like in the world. Now, what I mean by this is Christians tend to develop somehow this expectation that the world is going to like us, the world is going to be fans of ours, and that we're going to just get the pat on the back from the world. And really when this comes out is when all of a sudden there's a contrast in between how the world views you. You need to remember, we all need to remember, that the Bible makes it really clear that the expectation of the Christian life is not that everything is fantastic all the time. When it comes to difficulty and trouble, we're promised and told that we are to expect to be persecuted, that we expect trial, difficulty, that we expect suffering, we expect that we're going to be troubled in this world, and that we're even going to be hated by this world. Now, on the outset, that's not a very encouraging statement. It's kind of like, oh, that doesn't sound good, and none of us want that. And you might even be in your own head pushing back and saying, yeah, but I don't know if that's always the case, because people right now in the world, they don't hate me. I'm fairly liked. Well, in the culture that we're in that still has Christian components to our culture, we can still be liked, but as more and more opposition grows to our message when it comes to things even like homosexuality and gender and sex and marriage, these type of things, have conversations about those things and you'll see the perspective of the world and how Christians are viewed. So the question becomes then, the expectation is that we look different in this regard, that we expect to face difficulty in this world, which means that as we face difficulty in this world, we need to look different when we go through it. We absolutely have to remember that when we face trial and persecution and difficulty, and when people push back against our message, when things get hard, when we go through a trial with joy and hope and anticipation, when we find strength in God in the midst of difficulty, that is very important for us to live counterculturally, to live differently than the world, to not be conformed to it and to become burdened by all these trials, and to seek to love your own life to the point where you are going to do anything to protect yourself and you're going to live in fear and isolation. We are now called to be different. We're called to be separate from the world in the sense that we are acting differently in every single way. We need to have that expectation that there's going to be difficulty. We don't seek to now just find comfort in our lives when these things happen, or to be conformed when this takes place. When someone pushes back and hates us, we now reject our title and our position and now live in a way that pleases the world. We are different, immediately different. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to not delude ourselves with these false expectations that everything is going to be fine and the world is going to like us. One of the things about remembering that you are different from the world is that the world is going to be opposed to you sometimes, and that is okay. If anything, that is a mark of the fact that you are living for Christ, that you are taking a stand in opposition to the world. When we have expectations that everything's fine, that might even come against us and say, are you really living for Christ? Now again, that might not be the case in a Christian culture, but as the culture transitions into a post-Christian culture and people are moving more in the direction of not being religious in any sense and definitely not having Christian values, we are going to face persecution, trial, and hatred. But in the midst of that, we take comfort in remembering that we are different. This is something that should encourage us. This is something that when the world pushes back on us and we face some trial and difficulty, that we get encouraged in our spirit knowing that we're different because we're redeemed. The realities of what it means for us as Christians are so much better. The surpassing worth of knowing Christ and being found in Him is better than anything the world can offer us. And we need to take solace in that. So I've put together some questions for you, for your groups for this week that I want you to go through, and I want you to think about what it looks like for you to grab hold of this reality that you are different from the world, to take that into your soul, to digest that and to understand what this means, and to remove those false expectations that you may have in your mind that kind of creep in slowly over time, that when the world pushes back, that's a bad thing. That's not always a bad thing. That could be a very good thing, conforming us not to the pattern of this world, but to the image of Christ. So hopefully this is helpful for you this week as you consider this in your groups. We'll see you hopefully in person very, very soon, and we'll see you next week.